Hi everyone, just been watching James from JVC Paints' latest upload to YouTube, and at the end of it he mentioned having just watched this film. I think he watched it on YouTube, and he suggested that people put up suggestions for something to watch while they were painting or whatever. I thought I'd reply in terms of a video rather than in a comment. So I've got quite a lot of things to say on the subject of cinema and TV and viewing and so on. So I thought I'd turn it into a little video upload to YouTube. And now, Das Boot, I can remember seeing when it was first released in the cinema in the UK in I think it was the early 1980s, 1981. Saw it in the cinema, as I say, in Leicester Square in the centre of London, and I seem to remember it being an extremely long film, over 4 hours. This DVD is 200 minutes long, so it's still a fair sized chunk of viewing. What's that, 3 hours 20 minutes? I thought, my recollection, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I was just getting a sore bottom from having sat in the cinema so long. My recollection is it was approaching 4 hours in length. Fantastic immersive film. If you haven't seen it, then it's really worth of watching it. I certainly back James's recommendation of it. Just recently there has been a TV series called Das Boot, which is kind of it's a sort of reference to this film, but it's completely unrelated to it. And I watched the first series, and to be honest, I found it a little bit nasty, a bit unpleasant. There was an awful lot of violence in it, especially towards women, which I never like seeing on TV and or on film, and I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't be, if you've seen that and not this, I wouldn't be put off picking this up and watching it. Now I've got loads of DVDs. I want to show you things that you might find worth watching, and I'm going to whittle on a little bit and probably go from subject to subject as I do it. But let's put another DVD up and get going. I very rarely go to the cinema nowadays. I'm a massive fan of film and TV, and I enjoy the viewing experience, as it were, but cinema to me is not a very attractive place to go any longer. Maybe it's my age or my sort of social circumstances and so on. I find I much prefer to watch things when they come out on DV, and I like to have DVDs. I like to have the sort of physical hard copy in my hand, rather than stream things. I recently had to replace my Skybox, and the new box is called Sky Q, and it's fine, it's great, brilliant, it's very good quality viewing, but anything that you record on it is just there in the ether. On my original Skybox, I used to be able to feed the recording through my DVD player, which has a hard drive on it, and record it onto my DVD player, and then from there write it onto DVD. So I actually had the whatever it was, the film or the TV series in hard copy, which I've got stacks and stacks of these DVDs that I've written things onto over the years. I can't do that any longer with the new Sky Q, or at least I haven't found a way of doing it so far. Maybe if I get the appropriate kind of cable connections, it might be possible in the future, but I haven't done it so far. But it does affect your viewing experience because, for one thing, it's very vulnerable to being erased. There's a limit to how much you can store, on the cue box, as it were. It's got a certain memory capacity. What happens to your original recordings once you've filled up that space? You're going to be compelled to delete them, and they're gone forever. And that's something I want to come back to in a minute. But to carry on with this film anyway, this is a film which I did see in the cinema. November. It was about November of 2019, and a friend of mine had a offer at the cinema, that we could go and see it locally. So, I took advantage of that, and we both went to see it together. And we saw it in what do they call it? A 4X cinema or something like that. It was the total kind of sensory immersion experience. The seats moved. You had spray in your face as you were watching particular scenes with the waves crashing over the decks of aircraft carrier and so on, and all kinds of bullet sounds whistling past your ears and thudding into the back of your chair and that kind of thing, with all the aerial fights, and it was absolutely brilliant. Not something that you can recreate at home, obviously, but when this came out on DVD, when the DVD version came out, I thought I would pick it up and have it in my collection. It's not the same experience watching it on TV, obviously. I kind of think this is marginally better than the Battle of Midway film that was made in the 1970s, was it, with Charlton Heston. It's a little bit more wandering and rambling, because it starts with at the attack on Pearl Harbor and so on, and whereas the original film, the Battle of Midway film, it does have a kind of a sort of subplot of various family relationships and so on, and romances and such, as this one does, but it's confined to the Battle of Midway campaign. This is a lot more kind of widely spread, and obviously a lot of the dramatic kind of scenic effects and things are a little bit lost on the small screen, and this is something that has happened with the viewing experience, as it were, over the years. Like Das Boot works just as well on TV as it does on the big screen, because of the nature of the way cinema was back in the 1980s, and how much this is different in that cinema has changed so much, and part of that is this kind of constant pressure to have blockbuster films, and the only way you're going to really gross a lot of money through the cinema now is to have a film that is viewable across the world, and that means in particular that it sells well in China and the Far East and so on, and therefore you can't have films that really have a lot of demands on your linguistic ability. You either have to dub over them, or you concentrate on the spectacle. You concentrate on car chases and explosions and so on, things that don't need language, and that has really, to my mind, detracted from the quality of film. Das Boot would be almost unviewable in the English language to someone watching it in China, whereas here you can follow the story just by watching the fight scenes. So this is a good film to watch, nevertheless. You know, if you haven't seen it, it's worth watching. But things aren't what they used to be, is really what I want to say. Now, this next one, I purchased quite recently. It's a film that I've seen before. I originally had it on VHS, and I've still got a VHS player, so I still could watch that particular version of it. But I'm finding, unlike the guarantees that came out with a lot of VHSs at the time, they don't last particularly well. They don't endure. The quality of the image deteriorates. The tape itself can get. I've even had tapes that have got a little bit of damp in them and gone a little bit mouldy, and the picture quality really deteriorates. So it's always wise to upgrade from VHS to DVD if you're able to. I didn't really think too much of this film when I first saw it, but watching it again on DVD. I thought more of it. It's in German. It's the story of a group of soldiers who are transferred from Italy to the Battle of Stalingrad, and the outcome of all their various experiences and so on. It has some fantastic battle scenes in it, so it's worth watching for the battle scenes alone, which are very gritty and compelling. There's fighting through factories and through sewers and all the sort of things you would expect. It seems to me to be quite an accurate representation of the fighting in Stalingrad, but it does have some odd kind of devices. Like there's a particularly kind of evil, I think his SS officer. They're kind of over exaggerated in order to get the point across about the brutality of the fighting, but also the sort of twisted element of sort of Nazi Germany and so on. So there's some very odd kind of sequences that although I can imagine something along those lines happened, I think they've been exaggerated in this film. So for instance, there's this particular officer is sort of holed up in a huge warehouse of commodities and goods and luxuries and so on, that the officer class has kind of accumulated. And I know that was certainly, when what was his name? The guy, I've forgotten his name. The German commander who capitulated. His headquarters certainly did have a certain amount of champagne and caviar and cognac in it, but not to the kind of warehouse extent that's portrayed in this film. But they do it to make the contrast between the reality of the fighting soldier and the certain elements of the high command. But a good film, worth following, worth watching. This next one is a film called The Mercenaries, which stars Rod Taylor. When it first was released, it was what was it called? The Dark of the Sun, I think it was called. It's based on the experiences of the mercenary commander Mike Hoare, was it, in the Congo, but highly glamorized and romanticized. But at the same time, also, the original film was really brutal. Didn't kind of shy from showing atrocities and so on committed by the Simba in Stanleyville and so on, places like that. But this is a little bit more glamorized, and the DVD release has been, and I think the final film release, when they changed its name to The Mercenaries, was edited quite heavily to remove a lot of the distressing scenes. It's the story of a group of mercenaries who are sent to retrieve the citizens of a particularly beleaguered outlying town, and they fortify and armour a train and go by train, and then things begin to unravel and go wrong when they get there. The story of how they fight their way out, and the kind of conflicts between the main protagonist and his kind of sub-commander, who is a sort of self-seeking, brutalised ex-Nazi mercenary, who's definitely the bad guy in the film. But yeah, definitely worth watching. I think this film has been recommended or quoted as a kind of an influence on Quentin Tarantino. It came out in the 1960s. Definitely worth watching, and I particularly bought it recently and watched it because I sort of got really interested in modern African warfare and so on. I just wanted to watch it to remind me and give me a few kind of ideas of how to war game the period. This is a film that I've had for a long time. It's not one I've bought since COVID and the lockdown, but I can recommend it if you're interested in anything colonial, sort of warfare. Not that it's got that much fighting in it, but it is a very good kind of, I think, captures the sort of atmosphere of the pre-mutiny kind of era of British rule in India. When that time when India, the early part of the 19th century, rather than post the Indian Mutiny, when it was when India wasn't governed by the East India Company. And it's based on a book, The Deceivers, written by John Masters, who was actually Indian Army officer in the 1930s and during the Second World War. And my father actually served under Masters in Burma, and I have to kind of divorce my feelings for John Masters from the quality of his writing. He writes a lot of sort of histories of or stories on the history of India, but his military abilities left something to be desired. Let's put it that way. So this is based on the book, which itself is based on the true story of an East India Company officer who took it upon himself to try and eradicate the thuggee cult, who were causing a lot of disturbance and disruption to trade and commerce and so on in India. Basically, religious sort of cult robbers. Ritualistic murder is the way they describe it here. And he plays this. Pierce Brosnan plays this officer, Captain William Savage, who infiltrates the cult and tries to get to the sort of bottom of it and capture the ringleaders and so on and eradicate them. Definitely a film worth watching. Not one that I've watched this year, but I thought I'd put it there just in terms of viewing, recommendation. This one I have just bought. Now, this kind of gets me onto the subject of the loss of so much TV that was worth retaining, but somehow, if I didn't record it at the time, then it's very hard to kind of get it back. And this particular serialization of the story of the Four Feathers, which if you're into sort of colonial warfare and cinema, you'll certainly know of the Alexander Korda version of the film of the story of the Four Feathers, which again is based on a novel. But this one was a TV serialization, I think from the 1970s. It looks about that period. It's got Beau Bridges, Robert Powell, Jane Seymour, Simon Ward, all that sort of classic 1970s, early 80s kind of era actors. And at the time, I don't think I even had a video recorder at the time. I did have a very early VHS recorder, but certainly missed out on recording it at the time, so I didn't have it to keep. And I have a feeling, from this particular year, that there's an awful lot of old TV series that are only now being put on DVD. I don't know when this one was actually written to DVD. I can't see a date on it. The original copyright is 1977, so that tells you when the TV series came out. But I don't think this has been on DVD very long, otherwise I would have spotted it a long time ago. And I'm very glad I got it. It actually incorporates some of the footage from the Korda film, so it has got a little bit of spectacle in it, quite good battle scenes in it and so on. But it was filmed certainly in the desert somewhere, or the Sudan scenes are certainly filmed in the desert. So they must have filmed it on location somewhere, which, so there was, it's not all filmed in the studio. So there was certainly some, quite good production values. It's well acted. The story diverts a little bit from, if you only know the story from the Korda film. Oh, and by the way, there was another version of the Four Feathers made. Again, I've forgotten the actor, Heath, the chap that died making the Batman film. So a much more recent version, which again the story was nothing like the novel or the original film. But this one is closer to the book. Apparently, I haven't read the book. So it's set during the first British kind of involvement in the Sudan, when the Mahdi first came to power and Gordon was besieged in Khartoum and so on, rather than the later Kitchener expedition in 1898. And the plot differs a little bit in terms of the reasons why the main protagonist is given the Four Feathers and so on. So it's much closer to the book, but really worth watching. And also, it's kind of very satisfying for me personally to finally have it and be able to hold it and be able to keep it and refer back to it in future years. Maybe that's just something about my particular psychology and mentality, but I much prefer holding it in my hands, as I say, to kind of having this very precarious sort of hold on it through the internet, which can get cut at any time, and it's sort of lost for another couple of decades. Again, a very similar kind of reason for this. I'm sure this hasn't been out on DVD very long. The Four Feathers was a Granada TV, so a commercial channel in the UK. This was a BBC series originally. I think this dates back to 1971. I can remember seeing this on TV in 1971 and really enjoying it. I was watching it on a black and white television at the time, but it's still, sort of etched itself into my memory. And I was just sort of browsing Amazon recently and came across it. So I don't think it has been out that long. And as I say, I get the feeling that a lot of TV companies have capitalised on the fact that people have been, stuck at home during all this era of COVID and watching a lot more television, and they're kind of dipping into their archives to see what they can churn out to, generate a little bit of income and so on. And this is a sort of drama documentary about the search for the source of the Nile. If you're into something like Congo, the war game Congo, then you will probably get something out of this. There's not a vast amount of fighting in it. There are a few sort of skirmish scenes and that like, but it's mainly about the explorers themselves. It deals with Burton and Speke and their relationship with one another, their rivalry, even though they were on the same expedition, the way they fell out so bitterly, and the kind of tragic consequences that had on the pair of them. It has Samuel Baker in it and his wife, I think it was called Florence, who were explorers. They went down the Nile from the Sudan, across the Sud, trying to find the source. Burton and Speke crossed over from Zanzibar and headed inland to try and find it, and they quarrelled over which particular lake they thought the Nile stemmed from, whether it was Lake Victoria or Lake Tanganyika. Never really resolved their differences. There's Stanley and Livingstone, obviously, are in it. And it's well acted. Certainly, this is another thing in the way the viewing has changed, that this wouldn't be made by the BBC nowadays. It's something like 6 episodes and lots of kind of extraneous scenes, as it were. Lots of scenes set in England, in the sort of domestic scenes and so on. The story of how Burton met his wife and the strains that his explorations put on their marriage, and so on and so forth, and debates and committee meetings at the Royal Geographical Society. If this was made nowadays, it would be shortened down, to save money, into maybe a 2-hour piece in total. And it's a shame in a way, that BBC, like everyone, is so constrained by budgetary considerations nowadays, and it all stems from there being so many other channels, that they have to compete with now. So rather than making the viewing, making what's on television better, it's actually kind of ruined, the quality of what was originally there. I find it very difficult nowadays to find enough to kind of give me one evening's watch out of an entire week. There are a couple of good things on television at the moment I'm watching, but nothing of the kind of quality of some of these old TV documentaries and series. And again, this is a similar one. I bought this sometime around the first time of the first lockdown, watched it. Shaka Zulu. It's definitely a South African production. I think South African Broadcasting Corporation, yeah. It was on television in the UK. Didn't get particularly good, you know, reviews and so on. If you're into Zulu and Zulu Dawn and all that, I think there's something in this to watch and get get absorbed by. It. Very long. I can't remember how many episodes, but it's probably at least 12, maybe even more. All those classic Robert Powell again, Fiona Fullerton, Trevor Howard, Edward Fox, and it's really the story of Shaka himself, but it does go into an awful lot of the background of the various conflicts between the various African tribes and Shaka's rise to power. In that respect, it follows quite closely on the Washing of the Spears book by is it David Morris? I think that was his name. So if you haven't seen this and you're into Zulus, certainly worth watching. This is another series which I think has only just been released on DVD. Again, I might be wrong in that, but I've certainly never noticed it before on Amazon, and I do, I am quite a close observer of what's available. Another BBC series. This one was 1983, and I wasn't aware of this series at all. Probably because I was out of the country in 1983 and didn't watch hardly any television that year at all, and that was when this series was on. It's a 6-part, I think, story of Ernest Shackleton, starting right back in 1902, I think it was, when he first accompanied Robert Scott on an expedition to try and reach the South Pole, and again, a bit like the search for the Nile, the BBC had a lot of comfort in terms of time restraints, so there were a lot of scenes that wouldn't be in a more modern version of this story, but it goes into a lot of depth about the relationship between Falcon and Scott and how they were both driven by rivalry and a sort of dislike of one another in a way, to compete to reach the South Pole. And of course, neither of them were the first to get there, but it's a story of this sort of compulsion, Shackleton's compulsion to go to the Antarctic and to do things, visit places that no one else had visited, and make a name for himself, basically. But and the extraordinary story of his attempt to kind of cross the Antarctica from one side to the other, and how that all came unstuck in the Endurance, and well acted. Again, definitely worth watching, and I was quite pleased to come across this, as it gave me something fresh to watch that I'd never seen before. And another one exactly the same. This is another BBC series, not really. Shackleton wasn't either to do with warfare, but certainly to do with history. This was a series that was on in 1970s, I want to say 1974. Yeah, again, I can remember watching it in black and white. It's about 5 or 6 episodes long, and it's really the story of the decline of the sort of imperial dynasties before the First World War. So the Habsburgs, the Hohenzollerns, and the Romanovs. Very, very well researched and detailed history that you often don't even get in history books nowadays. It goes into some very it goes into the minutiae of a lot of the politics of the period, but not a kind of linear sort of story. It jumps about a bit in terms of the various episodes in history that it deals with. So the Mayerling affair in Austro-Hungary, for instance, it will jump from one kind of political salient kind of point to another, and not give you a kind of continuous story. So characters some characters do reappear in different episodes, but each episode can be watched in its own right, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Definitely worth watching though, but nearly all set, some outdoor scenes, but nearly all set in studios, studio sets and so on. But worth watching if you're into the history of that period. This is not a particularly good film, but it does have some quite good battle scenes. This is the film War and Revolution, but it's based on Sholokov's novel And Quiet Flows the Dawn. So it's the story of mainly one particular Cossack character who serves in the Imperial Russian Army in the First World War and then fights during the Civil War in Russian with subtitles, but worth watching. A little bit kind of amateurish in places, sort of. I don't want to be too condescending, but it's not the most brilliant of films. But I've only just noticed actually that it was directed by Sergei Bondarchuk, who of course is well known for Waterloo and the long version of War and Peace and so on. And I picked this one up some time ago in a charity shop, so that was pre-COVID. But I thought I would mention it as a possible viewing. On the subject of the First World War again, it's hard to find films that war gamers haven't actually seen, but you may not be familiar with this particular film, which is a French French film. Very kind of it's a lovely film to watch. It's got some very interesting kind of devices and so on. I seem to remember there's one scene where a pistol is fired, but you're taken inside the kind of mechanism of the pistol, and you watch the kind of bullet going through the chamber and into the kind of barrel and so on and out. So very clever in that respect. It's mainly a love story with based on a girl's efforts to find her lover who doesn't appear to have survived the First World War, but she sort of never gives up hope of finding him. I won't give the plot away, I'll give you any spoilers, but it's another kind of take on the sort of story of the First World War, which I think is more realistic or more kind of more accurate in its portrayal than a film like this, which I'm not saying isn't worth watching. This is the Sam Mendes film 1917 that came out recently. It's a good watch. I wasn't as impressed with it as a lot of people obviously have been. I think that's because I have my own fixed ideas about what the First World War was like, and I think that's the thing I'm most uncomfortable with about this film, that Sam Mendes actually dedicates it to his grandfather, who served in the First World War, as mine did. But he says that he based it on all the stories that his grandfather told him, and that really didn't ring true to me, because the generation, I obviously have known that being fairly old myself now, and you certainly never got First World War veterans talking about their experiences in the war. It was very kind of closed in and shut off really. They sort of shut it off from their minds. They wouldn't give their grandchildren long bedtime stories about what they got up to. But apparently that is what Sam Mendes bases this film on. And it also didn't seem to me to be a particularly realistic portrayal of what the Western Front looked like, or how you kind of existed in that horrendous landscape either. Again, it goes back to this thing about the nature of cinema has changed, and this is certainly a good viewing experience, but it's been done to put bums on seats rather than to give an accurate record of history or anything, even a sort of fictional story. They haven't attempted to set it in the real world, as it were, and that's just my own personal feeling of it. This is another film set in the First World War, which I think is actually better than 1917, although much of it is taken up with a love story, and it's a Canadian film, and much of it is set in Calgary rather than on the Western Front. But the battle scenes that there are in here are really worth watching. The story itself is okay, but it's a romance. It's not, it's nothing appealing for wargamers in it. And the final kind of denouement of the film is a very kind of theatrical kind of unreal kind of climax to the film. But the battle scenes themselves are really gritty and worth taking a look at. So I can recommend that film. Another one, I seem to have a lot of First World War films. This is one I've just been mentioning, conversation online with Paul Backus. He's quite keen on this film as well. I know, The Light Horsemen. Again, a film of its time. A few kind of production kind of faults in it and so on, but it's pretty well put together, and again the fight scenes, the battle scenes and so on, work very well, and that's really what you want to watch this film for. I mean, like Passchendaele, there's a lot of romance in it. They seem sort of going parallel in this film as they do in Passchendaele. But watching this, you can certainly pick out a lot of excitement and sort of stimulants for wargaming and so on. I say a non-wargaming film, but of course we all know the fictional character Callan was a massive wargaming enthusiast. And I've already got the entire BBC TV series on DVD, but I only purchased this in the last month or two and watched it. And it's based on the very first book and the first TV episode, which was called A Red File for Callan. And I have seen this before. Didn't think much of it at the time, but I thoroughly enjoyed watching this again. It was partly the kind of the sort of colour of it and the scenes in London, and just looking at how much London has changed since the 1970s and so on. And it's it's good enough series, good enough story in its own right. I think one of the reasons I wasn't so happy with it the first time I saw it was, although Edward Woodward plays Callan both in the film and the TV series, and Russell Hunter plays Lonely, a lot of the other characters are played by other actors, and you have to kind of sort of shift your kind of mentality a little bit to accept that they're playing those particular roles and recognise who they were in the TV series and so on. But yeah, I really enjoyed this film. It took me back. Nearly finished. Another couple of two old Hollywood films, because I'm being kind of interested in the 18th century warfare at the moment. They're in a little bit kind of short supply, but I thought both these films, which I've seen many times, might kind of reawaken, that kind of interest, and so I got hold of both of these and watched them again. Northwest Passage is better than Drums Along the Mohawk, but they're both set in that kind of area west of the Hudson River, the sort of last of the Mohicans kind of territory. This one's based on the Colonel Rogers, was he Colonel or Major? I can't remember. And the raid on the Abenaki village, and this one is more about. This one's set during the French Indian Wars. This one's set during the American War of Independence, and it's along the Mohawk River and a kind of British sponsored Indian raid on an American colonist settlement there. Both of them, worth a look. Finally, this one you may be familiar with, but you may not be familiar with this version. This is one of my all-time favourite TV shows. There was a BBC series, can't remember whether it was called Heroes and Villains when it was first on. I think it covered 4 characters. Obviously Napoleon was one of them. There was Spartacus, another one was Tokugawa Ieyasu, and there was Hernan Cortes as well. And they were 90 minutes long. Each one was 90 minutes long, so a kind of mini film. All of them were quite good, but this one really kind of bowled me away. Now, the BBC at some point sold it onto another TV channel. Not sure which one, something like Sky or something like that. And they chopped all of these episodes up into hour-long rather than 90-minute long stories. And in the case of this one, they absolutely butchered it. So this has now come out on DVD, and if you watch this on YouTube, you're going to see the hour-long version. Or if you get it sort of through any other medium, you'll probably find the hour. But you really need to watch the 90-minute one, I think. And what you get is kind of not just these really, really spectacular battle scenes. It's got one of the most impressive portrayals of a Napoleonic fight that I've ever seen. Very kind of small affair. It's basically when Napoleon first made his name as a military commander, when he took the British sort of fort or fortification that they'd placed on a spot overlooking Toulon Harbour called Little Gibraltar, which protected the ships in the harbour. And Napoleon realised that if he could take this point, he could threaten the entire British Navy that was anchored in the harbour, and thus force them to leave Toulon, and the siege of Toulon would succeed because the British would have deserted the port. And it's the story of the struggle over that fortification. But the whole point really of this 90-minute episode is that it's also the story of the political machinations that Napoleon and his family, particularly dominated by his mother Letitia, had to go through with this particular villainous character who, I forget his title, but he was basically like the local political commissar in the region. He's brilliantly played by Rob Brydon, who you would know better as the comedian and host of various TV panel shows and so on. But he gives an absolutely excellent portrayal of this character, really wicked and icy cold kind of threatening character, but also totally underwhelming in terms of his capabilities. And the only thing he's got going in his favour is the terror and the fear that the French Revolution kind of sway that they held over the population at the time, and the political kind of repression of the time. And Tom Burke, brilliant actor, who plays Napoleon. But the whole point about this 90 minutes is that it shows you all the kind of political wheeling and dealing and threats to Napoleon's life itself, that this guy Rob Brydon poses, and that the main bits that are cut out, for the hour-long version, are all to do with the whole of the Bonaparte family were involved in this struggle. And Napoleon has a younger sister whose name I forget. She's only 14 years old, but Rob Brydon takes a sort of fancy to her, and they use the girl. The whole family kind of knowingly use the girl to try and keep Rob Brydon sweet, so that Napoleon can kind of go behind Rob Brydon's back to the Committee of Public Safety in Paris and get permission for his various plans and so on. So it gives you a whole another layer of sort of understanding of what Napoleon had to go through in order to rise to power and so on. Really worth watching. But as I say, the actual the final storming of the fort is just absolutely brilliant. How they film it and how they show Napoleon's strategy and tactics for getting into the fort, and then very close to the end, the character that Rob Brydon plays, Napoleon has been wounded and he's being carried off the battlefield, and Rob Brydon says to him something like, "Enjoy this moment, it won't last," and Napoleon has this come back to him, "You're right, glory is fleeting, but obscurity lasts forever," and that's his great put down to Rob Brydon. Yeah, really worth watching, definitely worth watching. Anyway, that's all I want to say about film. That's probably gone on for about God knows how long. I can't see, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and if you've got any viewing recommendations of your own, why not put up a video and let us know. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye for now.